So hello everyone again, and welcome to our webinar. We will discuss a crucial topic in today's digital landscape, consumer trust, and how to build consumer trust through data privacy. My name is Daniela Sanchez. I am the Privacy Knowledge Lead for the Law Library at Trustworthy. And before we delve into our discussion, I'd like to introduce the speakers who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in today's webinar. First, we have Dan Lowell, the Director of Privacy for Other Products. He's an attorney with experience in cybersecurity, developing data privacy programs, and negotiating international data transfers agreements. And one of our own, Adam Osborne, Principal Technical Account Manager at TrustTalk. So thank you so much for joining us. Businesses gain valuable insights from customer data to understand preferences, trends, and behavior, and use them to improve user experience, to develop new products and services, and personalize data advertising. However, we have found that people have become increasingly conscious of the significance of and the worth of their data and how sensitive their data can be, and like the consequences of their use can have. They're hesitant to sharing their personal information and want to be informed about how organizations use their data. And because of that, privacy has become a critical element in decision-making process for our customers. We expect it to become even more significant as we witness new technology developments that could significantly affect consumer privacy. With that, I want to open the floor to our speakers and ask them, what does consumer trust mean?
Well, that's a great question. I'll start. Consumer trust is all about trying to build a relationship. It's basically the foundation for external interactions, long-term engagement, and the idea of repeat customer engagement.
If maybe I can comment. So thinking about some of the factors for me that help to build trust between myself and any organization. Firstly, if that organization is collecting data, it's really them being transparent about what they're actually doing with it, then respecting any choices I make and just acting responsibly when they are collecting data. Those ways that kind of help build trust.
Yeah, I agree. I feel that transparency is a big topic in consumer trust. And also that is not something that is just like a started point, something that like a goal that you gain when you like collect the data of your customers, but trust is something that is built over time through positive consumer experiences. So it's important to like throughout the life cycle of the data that you have from your consumers to being able to be transparent and reliable. So do you think like complying with privacy laws can reinforce that trust that we are talking about?
Sure. Actually, compliance with the laws, one, demonstrates to both the regulators and the consumers that you have a commitment to privacy, but it also goes toward that transparency. You want to communicate, you want to be consistent, you want to make sure that the consumers know what it is you're doing by demonstrating, one, by being in compliance. Not only do you set aside issues with fines and regulatory audits, but you also demonstrate actively that you respect the privacy rights of consumers and that you are, as an organization, moving forward in it and attempting to engage those consumers on a level, the way that they want to be engaged with.
And adding to what Dan said, if an organization is demonstrably complying with laws such as GDPR, then their customers can be reasonably certain that they are collecting data only for the specified purposes that that the customer has agreed to, and they are not misusing their data. So compliance with GDPR, an organization rather that has compliance with laws such as GDPR, is an organization which you maybe trust to look after your data responsibly.
Yeah, I agree. And like also like it shows like the integrity of the company. And yeah, I agree with Adam and Dan, like how the company respects people privacy and how they're valued consumer privacy. And going to what Dan was saying about the having comply with individual rights, also that shows that like and every day more and more like privacy laws are like trying to give consumers back their control of their data, so they can like choose whatever they want, like based on the information that they have through the transparency measures that organizations have put in place. So thinking about that, like, do you think that consumer control over their personal data enables business to build that trust?
I believe so. I mean, I think that goes with the consistency. One of the things that's particularly challenging is if you have a organization that has any kind of global reach, you find yourself in a situation where you're attempting to comply with multiple regions at the same time. And you may even get engaged with consumers that want to exercise rights that they don't technically have. Like in the US, we have what we like to euphemistically call the patchwork quilt approach to privacy. But that means that there's a significant number of US states that don't actually have data privacy legislation in place. So in those cases, falling back on that transparency and that consistency, you could engage the consumer one way where you basically say, oh, I'm sorry, you're in a state that doesn't have data privacy rights and we're not going to recognize that. Or you could set that baseline and say, for all of our consumers, regardless of where you come from, we're going to do our best to honor that set line and say, like, even though you may come from, specific to the US, you may come from a region that doesn't have data privacy laws, we're going to go ahead and respect that as if you came, as if you did. Specifically for us, we use, if we either can't identify where a data subject is coming from, or they haven't specified what region they're in, we set Colorado, because Colorado has a very robust data privacy law in place. We set that as the baseline and give basically any of our consumers those same rights as they would have if they were a Colorado citizen.
And adding to that, to my mind, giving users control over how much information they share, really this is allowing the user to determine how deep their relationship with your organization will be. So if by giving the user this ability to determine how deep their relationship is be, then respecting their choices here, you are kind of helping to, demonstrably respecting their choices. This kind of helps build trust with the user.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And that also answer, like we have a question in the chat right now, and I feel that you just both answer that question. Like this person is saying like that research showed that regulatory compliance may not be sufficient to gain consumer trust, and not like just complying with the law is not going to gain consumers their trust. As comply with the law is just like the baseline, but as Dan was saying, if you're in a state that doesn't have a consumer law, or in a country that doesn't really protect your privacy, like people are still expecting the companies to like have like a minimum respect for your data, and also like a baseline transparency of like giving people the information so they can like know how to act and how to interact with the company, and giving them, as like coming back to the control, like giving them control even if that is not specifically required by law, like giving control to the customers, enable them to like trust in whatever we're doing with their data as a company, and that we're going to use it responsibly and legally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's that idea of treating it as a baseline, because I think you're correct. I think that's correct, that the expectation now is that that consumers have control over their information, and they should. There's a very reasonable expectation. The reality is not every region recognizes that, but as an organization, that becomes sort of a strategy or an ethical approach to basically saying, yes, we're going to go ahead. We're not even going to acknowledge that you're coming from a region that doesn't have that. We're going to go ahead and set you in a region that does, and just honor it. And it goes toward that communication piece as well. Sorry, Adam, you were going to say something.
No, you've pretty much covered it, Dan. It's fine.
And I feel that like when you were saying that also like goes back to like the organization like their values and and principles. How are they going to act in the market, and how they're going to treat their customers, even if they're in a region that they're protected by law or not. And yeah, going that extra mile to gain consumer trust. And I have thoughts about that, but do you think that organizations have can use trust as a competitive advantage and use that as a part of a business strategy?
Yeah, if I can take this one, yes. I mean, I think thinking now as a consumer, as well as a TrustLock employee, but mainly as a consumer here, when faced with making any purchases for anything at all, trust is going to be a significant factor, and this is a multi-layered kind of trust. It can be, say, a trust, for example, if I'm going to order a pair of shoes online, that the business will ship my product and not run off with my money. It can be trust that whatever it is I'm going to purchase is going to be of the quality I was expecting, and it's going to meet my needs. And this trust is going to extend also to how the organization will look after any data which I've shared with them as part of this process, especially when this data is of a sensitive nature. As a consumer here, if I do not think I can trust an organization for whatever reason, it is likely that I will not use them. I will seek to do business with a rival. So, yeah, certainly I think that trust is important to any business for a variety of reasons, and trust that the organization is respecting your data and your data choices is one facet of this trust.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, I think that's correct. Absolutely. Like, especially the piece where you say it's one facet. Like, I think as a consumer, there's a certain level of jadedness that you expect an organization or a corporation to communicate certain things. The real proof in the pudding, as they say, is whether or not they actually follow through. And I think that's where that business advantage can come from, is if you can demonstrate that what you're communicating as the values of your organization, your company, that you're actually following through and being transparent and following up on those. Now that's a challenge that goes beyond the privacy program and gets into the marketing and your PR and other elements of the organization, but it certainly is one of those key cornerstones that's important.
Yes, because if you like as a company decide that this is how we are going to position ourselves in the market as a privacy respectful company, let's say that way, it has to like involve all your stakeholders and like be like like a core value of your organization and how you make businesses. I want to make a quick poll here. Can we set up the poll? Okay, thank you. How significant are the challenges posed by marketing department pushbacks when implementing privacy measures? The answers are very significant, significant, moderate, minor, not significant at all. Let's wait a few seconds while we get the opportunity to answer.
And I know we'll get into this a little more detail further on in the panel, but yeah, I know from talking to my colleagues who are in marketing, we try to have a very close relationship. This can be a real challenge for them and for other privacy programs to try to balance that. So I'm curious to see what others have to say, what their experience is.
Do we have the response yet? Um,
All right.
okay, moderate. So that's nice to see. What do you think about that, Dan and Adam?
How significant? Um, Honestly, I was expecting to kind of see it to more significant to very significant, just in my experience running consent projects for clients. Because yeah, there is a challenge. Say the marketing team will maybe want to collect as much data as possible, and I get that. I've worked in marketing, but also we've got to respect the users' choices, and respect the regulatory environments in which we operating. So I'm quite surprised. I'm surprised at those scores.
It is interesting. Yeah, like at least a third is saying that it's significant to very significant. So the this gets to the heart of that business um, business values and business judgments of, the marketing department has their job, the privacy team has their job, but ultimately we should be working together for the benefit of the organization. And if your values are aligned, the benefit of the organization is also a benefit to the consumer as well. So I'm not surprised that that there's at least some struggle going on here. It really, I imagine, would depend a lot on the industry that the organizations are sitting in.
Yeah, I'm gonna go like, yeah, I agree with kind of with both of you, like, but yes, I was expecting more like a significant, very significant chunk of people, but um, it's a happy surprise, let's say that way, that is being a moderate pushback. Because yeah, how as we were saying, like in order to an organization to like push trust as a core value, all the stakeholders has to be involved, and we have to like yeah, the organization must ensure that all actors understand the importance of data protection and privacy, and how important is that to like build consumer trust, which ultimately is going to contribute to the business retention and sustainability, and be like a good factor for every department, let's say it this way.
Yeah,
Um,
and if I could add to the flipping this on its head, this could also be an indication that there's, because it's lower than we thought, this might mean that there is actually some good alignment between the marketing and privacy teams for the people who are on the webinar today, and that has reduced some of the struggle.
yeah, yeah, as that should be. And we hope every time we see more like minor to not significant at all pushbacks eventually from
Yeah.
marketing departments.
Yeah, and if
Uh,
I think of the region where I'm based, which is Europe, hence the accent, I think now that we've had privacy laws since I think 2018 now, maybe marketeers are now more aware of these requirements now. It's become less of a shock than maybe it did do a few years ago. So there's less pushback because there's more awareness of the environment you work in.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting. Something you said reminded me of this. What one of the I think the inherent struggles across the pond, if you will, is that from a European perspective, the privacy and protection of your personal data is considered a fundamental right. From a US perspective, it's approached more as a consumer protection issue than an actual right. So that's why it's been sort of pushed down to the state level, where the way our constitutional system works, the state builds up on our federal constitution. So if a state feels that their citizens should have this as a right, then the states will put those in place, which is why we kind of have that, again, that patchwork quilt approach. So it does create an interesting challenge here in the U.S., especially since we've come at this from a approach, I don't know, 20 years ago, where it was like grab all the data you can because you can, to now, no, we need to start doing data minimization and really only take what you need and don't figure it out later, figure it out at the beginning.
Yeah, and also like not only doing that, but letting people know what are you doing and that what are you collecting and for what purposes. And if you're going to eventually use it for another purposes, like obtaining consent for those other further processing purposes. Um, so yeah, that goes back to like how like transparency is like so important for like building trust and transparency, like being like very clear of what you're going to do and being like using plain language and communicating to the consumer like what is really what you're going to do and like help them understand what are you going to do and use their data for.
Yeah, I mean, if I say, if I look at, say, reports from clients who are based in the GDPR region in the EU, what we do see is that when we do have consent manager in the EU, we see that I think the majority of users are happy to opt into most trackers. I'm not going to give exact statistics here; I don't have them. As when there is a clear notice that we are collecting cookies, this is what they are using for. So you can still you can still collect data. The users are generally happy to opt in where they are given that clear purpose of what the data is for.
I'm glad that you bring up cookies because yeah, like cookies is well, we encounter cookies every time we like go on the internet, and now we spend most of our time working on the internet. So, how important do you consider cookie compliance to build customer trust?
I, I'd say I'll start. I'd say it's essential not only from a regulatory and compliance perspective, but it's the first. Oftentimes, it's that first interface that a consumer has with your organization is approaching that cookie banner, getting the even just what options are you providing? Is it an opt-in? Is it an opt-out? Um, I I think it's essential just because like it's that first touch, it's that first element of communication and transparency that you have.
Yeah, going along with what Dan was saying, yeah, because it's important just right at the start to be very transparent. These are the trackers we have on the website. This is what we are do. This is what we are using them for, and this is the kind of information we collected. And if you're upfront with people at the start, well, this gives them the enough information to make whatever choice they decide to do.
Well, like one of the topics we like encounter a lot while talking about cookies is also like dark patterns and how like that can those kind of tactics can mislead customers to like doing things that they in a normal situation would not accept. Do you think that using or avoiding those type of mechanisms and dark patterns affect consumer trust?
Well, straight away, organisations such as CNIL in France and the UK DPO, they have issued guidance stating that dark patterns, which would be used to maybe lead the user to, say, consenting to all trackers, these are not really compatible with GDPR. So it's always TrustDoc's recommendation that these are avoided. When you do see a consent notice that does not meets the guidance from the likes of CNIL and from the likes of DPO, you may question how serious that organization is about respecting my privacy choices as a user.
And it's funny you say that because I'm thinking my own personal use. I mean, I think we're all data privacy nerds here on this call, but one of the things is like that's the first thing that I notice when I go onto a site. What is it that they're presenting me, and what level of detail? Like I'm often surprised where I'll go to a traditional retail website and the level of detail that they get into in their cookie banner and trying to be, you can tell like they're trying to be concise, but they've got all the buttons, they have all the options. You're like, wow, this is actually kind of cool. I would not have expected it from this organization, not because I didn't think that they believed in privacy, but that it's clear, at least from my perspective, when you see that they're going to that extra level of effort to get it right.
Yeah, and that ties up to like how trust like influences decision making to consumers. Like in my experience, like every time that I go into a website and see a dark patterns, like I feel cheated. It's like, how dare they? I can make business with you, company, that if you're doing this kind of things. And that also like made me unsure of like if they're presenting, like as Dan was saying, like if this is their first approach to me, what else are they going to do, like if I do business with this company? So I do feel like dark patterns are like, yeah, big no, if you're trying to like build consumer trust, because like that takes away the control, which was we've been discussing, that giving control to the customers is very important. Using this kind of mechanisms like takes control from the customer and give it back to the organization. So it defeats like consumers' privacy expectations and how consumers expect organizations to be transparent and to like allow them to freely consent to the use of their data.
Yeah,
Um,
and like and one thing I said, Dan mentioned, we maybe we all are quite interested in privacy just because of the nature of our jobs. But when we do see organizations that are clearly using dark patterns, what are they trying to do? Why are they cutting corners cutting corners with their website? What's they trying to do? It's a red flag.
yeah, definitely. Um, and like now that like we're like have like an ever evolving privacy landscape that also like include cookie requirements, how do you stay compliant with this data privacy law?
It's a challenge.
I bet.
Okay. Would it be okay if I plug TrustArc here? I work for them after all. So TrustArc Consent Manager clients, you've got have access to our global consent laws configuration guide. It's available on our support portal. We can share it with anybody who needs it. What this does is it gives TrustArc's recommendation for compliance with consent laws around the world. In addition, TrustArc have NIMITY research under our umbrella. This provides the latest guidance on wider privacy law around the world, and certainly TrustArc clients that do use NIMITY research are staying ahead of our ever-changing regulatory landscape. So that's the information over that.
And I'll say I have NIMITY as one of the tools in my toolbox, and it's essential for doing just that, trying to stay on top. In the US, it can be a real challenge. We just had, I believe it was Maryland, just came out and had theirs signed. So that's another one I've got to spin up on pretty quick and figure out. I'm from our position, I'm confident that we are in alignment unless there's something really unusual in there. But you never want to take that stuff for granted, and having some kind of resource behind you to help you keep on top of it is it's a non-starter to not have one.
Yeah, no, yeah. Also, like that as a resource, and also like implementing frameworks that like giving you the possibility to like implement like principle based and a principle sorry, having a principle based approach that like streamlines compliance, uh, helps saving a lot of time and resources, which would be different if you like start developing compliance procedures from scratch. So yeah, I agree with you, like having a resource where you can like help you stay up to date and using a framework.
Absolutely.
What do you struggle with in terms of cookie compliance?
So I'll take this one. Like basically just staying up to date. There's two things that wind up being a challenge for me and my team. Is one is staying up to date with the laws, with new interpretations, with new regulations that roll out, but also staying on top of the business itself. Like any organization focused on growth and focused on development, they want to make improvements, they want to make changes. I feel like we have a good system of communication here internally at Otter, but sometimes those can break down, with the moving with the speed of business, or as we call it, otter speed. Sometimes the questions come up front, and sometimes the questions come at the end. Ideally, we'd like them to all come up front, but the reality is that doesn't always happen. So just staying on top of what is it we need to do and what is it we're currently doing, and making sure that anything that we make changes or we make improvements or we're introducing new product lines, that anything that we do in those activities, that we're still in alignment with, one, our values, and two, with the regulations and what it is that we need to be doing. And even in that gray area of, what about states that or other regions of the world that don't have anything? It's getting harder and harder to do that. But if you set that baseline, like we talked about earlier, that in and of itself makes things a lot easier. It doesn't completely eliminate the challenge, but it does make it easier.
I mean, maybe I can go for it.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, so if I can maybe think about, say, on the other side of the fence, what the clients struggle with, against what Dan has talked about, is just staying on top of the regulatory landscape, staying on top of the regulatory landscape as it evolves. And what you do see is there tends to be patterns of clients that maybe will come in with similar requests. Thankfully, though, when these do come in, your technical account manager will be well versed in hopefully answering them, because the requests do tend to be kind of of a similar nature when they happen.
So one of the things that comes to mind when I talk about cookies and use of data throughout the internet is the requirements from California and Connecticut and Colorado, and even more state laws that require companies to recognize universally opt-out mechanisms, such as privacy controls, global privacy controls. Do you think that impact consumer trust, and what do you think of this in general?
Okay, so universal opt-outs, such as global privacy control, as a technical level, what they do is they allow the user to set their preferences at browser level. And as mentioned by Daniela, these are mandated in states such as California and Colorado. Where these impact our clients is that if the user is setting their preferences at browser level, they simply may have forgotten they do so. And this, if it's a restrictive state, would impact on the ability of websites to collect, say, data analytics, or to personalize the user experience. So universal opt-outs do present a challenge certainly for website operators. That said, when a client is in a region where GPC, for example, is mandated, it is possible for them to show a consent notice whilst at the same time respecting GPC signals, so that if the user, even with GPC turned on, visits the website, they have this information, that there are trackers present, they can see the purpose, and should they decide that they want to override GPC for this website, they can do so.
Yeah, that's going back to something we mentioned previously. I think that's something that when GPC is being used, I don't think the user will notice when it's acknowledged, but they'll definitely notice when it's not. The other challenge in that is also, like Adam mentioned, giving users that control. So let's say they have that baseline of, nope, I don't want anything, go ahead and turn it all off. And then they get to a website and they find out, well, there's some additional functionality they actually want to use. Having that ability for the user to re-engage and say, okay, yeah, actually, in this case, I'm okay with sharing this information for this purpose. That can be an interesting challenge as well to confront, but certainly something that I think is worthwhile and builds back toward that transparency. You're interacting with the consumer, you're allowing them to provide the information that they want to provide on their terms, and I think that helps go back to building that trust and that relationship.
Yeah, one of the things I'm curious about is what's going to happen when someone is using multiple devices. And if I'm using this opt-out signal in my browser in my computer, and then I go to my cell phone and go to the same page, and I realize that they're not respecting the opt-out signal that I give in my browser. Like, are consumers expecting those like opt-out signals to like track them like over like their multiple devices, and how organizations are going to handle this without collecting too much data too? Because in order to like link consumers' devices, there's also data that needs to be collected. So I feel that this is going to be like a major challenge, and that can like ultimately affect consumer trust.
Yeah,
Well,
I was going to say this is a real challenge here. I think it's challenging both from the user's perspective as well as from the organization's perspective, trying to respect the privacy of the individual enough that, do we cross correlate so that when they're using multiple devices, we know it's the same person. That might actually be defeating the purpose of GPC. I think we could have, like, this could probably be a topic of a webinar all of itself.
yes, I completely agree.
Yeah, but it is certainly a challenge.
Yes. So one of the things you mentioned is about how this can like personalized experience can become increasingly difficult. So I want to ask you that question, but I want the public to also respond to a poll here. If Marie can help me with the second poll. What is the biggest challenge in balancing personalized experience with consumer privacy? Collecting enough data for personalization, and we were saying obtaining meaningful consent, implementing privacy-enhancing technologies, legal compliancy, or consumer trust. And while we give the opportunity to people to respond, Dan and Adam, what do you think? Like, how organizations can balance personalized experience and consumer privacy?
I mean, to my mind, when thinking about when thinking about making changes to a privacy program or starting it, and I think right at the start, it's extremely important to bring in multiple stakeholders in the business so that multiple voices are heard, and therefore the approach you take will meet not only the regulatory landscape which you operate in, but also meet hopefully go some way to meeting the needs of multiple stakeholders across the business. So it's really about bringing in stakeholders at a very early stage.
Yeah, and if I can add to that too, it goes back to that, the core values of your organization. If your values are aligned with your practices, then it will help streamline this process a little bit. One of the things I'll tell folks is, we get the question of, can we do something, or can we collect this? And I'll say, can we collect it is not the important question. The important question is, should we be collecting it? And the other side of that is, if we're collecting it, we need to tell people what it is we're collecting and why we're collecting it. And if communicating the fact that we're collecting certain information and the purpose for that collection of that information makes us uncomfortable as an organization, then we probably shouldn't be collecting that information in the first place. If telling them that we're doing it makes us uncomfortable, then we probably just shouldn't do it.
Yes, I agree. Do we have the answers of the poll, please? Okay, so we have like a tie between obtaining meaningful consent and consumer trust issues. Yeah, what do you think about that, Dan and Adam?
I think that's interesting. It's not too far off. I mean, we're all within 10-15% of each other. So, I mean, I think one of the things that this points out is that all of these are a challenge. But the consent, I know obtaining meaningful consent is something that's top of our mind all the time. Like, yes, we're getting consent, but was this actually voluntary? Was this actually does it serve the purpose for us, and does it serve the purpose of the consumer? So I know that's certainly a struggle for us.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing here, again, like the last poll, I'm surprised here. I thought that the challenge of meaningful consent would be higher, but I've been wrong about the last poll as well, so maybe I'm wrong about this one here. Again, that struggle of just obtaining enough information from the consent process. So I'm slightly surprised here. Maybe if there's another poll, maybe I won't be so surprised.
Yeah. Well, sometimes so far we've discussed how compliance with privacy laws and consent management helps to obtain and maintain consumer trust. But before starting discussing about AI, that is a completely other topic, I want to ask you briefly about security. With all the data breaches, and we, like every time we open the news, we know that another organization had a data breach. Uh, do you think that that affects consumer trust too? And would it be possible to use them as an opportunity to reinforce consumer trust?
I'm going to say think about this as a consumer who has been affected by a data breach. I'm not going to name the organization, but straight away, I think, yeah, okay, so there's been a data breach of this organization. So clearly their privacy program needs improving, isn't up to scratch maybe. So my question is, if their privacy program isn't up to snuff, maybe where else are they cutting corners? Where else are they not living up to what I'm expecting? Where else are they failing? And it can maybe kind of sow doubts with me as a consumer in an in that organization.
Yeah, and I love that quote at the bottom of this slide. Data drives business, but breaches drive customers away. I think um, you certainly, if you have a breach as an organization, you certainly have an opportunity to rebuild the trust. The question is, how deep of a hole are you trying to get yourself out of? And I think the first part of that is, how did you respond to the breach in the first place? And I think going back to that transparency, there's a struggle in here in terms of, there's the legal requirement of what you're supposed to communicate, but then there's the piece of how much information is too much. But I think you want to lean into it and try to say, like, look, here's where we've made a mistake, here's what's happened. As we understand it, here's the impact of the breach and what we're doing. This is the important part, what we're doing to fix it. Like, what are we doing to prevent this from happening in the future? It's certainly going to be a hit on your organization from a trust perspective, certainly other perspectives as well. But you do have an opportunity to at least try to mend that, or at least set yourself up another foundation to try to build off of again and say, yes, we know this has happened. We know we've lost your trust, but here's what we're going to try to do to rebuild that and regain you and keep you as a customer and regain your trust in the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that the way that an organization handles the data breach is so important because it's almost certain that at some point the organization is going to have a data breach, not only because of a cyber attacks and all these big things that we comes to our minds when we think about data breaches, but also like the smaller ones that are like related to human error. So how companies handle those kinds of breach, and if they handle it transparently and they implement mitigating measures, I think that's how the company can like use this unfortunate scenario to build consumer trust and let them know that even if things that they don't want happened, the organization is on top of it and can like secure their data and help them from that moment. So to start with our AI segment of the webinar, I promise this is the last poll. We want to make another quick survey. How important do you think the development of trustworthy AI is for maintaining consumer trust? Extremely important, very important, moderately important, slightly important, or not at all important?
And I'll throw in there the foundation of trustworthy AI is basically a system that is both ethical, transparent, and respects user privacy, which with current AI systems can also be a real challenge. That seems to be the word of the webinar today, is challenge. But I think that's pretty much sums up the data privacy realm as it is.
Do we have the responses of the poll? And I think that while we wait from the responses, also it's important to know, how do we define trustworthy AI? So Dan and Adam, do you have any thoughts of the definition of what this is?
There we go. Yeah, extremely important. I agree.
Yeah.
I think as a user, setting aside my current role as a user, I find generative AI to be very interesting and fascinating. Like I've used it for a number of personal projects just for the fun of it, to see what happens. I'll get started and I'll be like, oh, let me see what ChatGPT has to say about this. I know there's a whole bunch of other systems. That's the one I'm just most familiar with. But that idea of getting to your question, transparency, um, ethical behavior, and then respect for privacy is going to be a challenge, especially if you don't know what's happening under the hood.
Adam, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the first poll I've seen where I'm not surprised by the results at all here. So I think the reason for that is because certainly AI has become a buzzword in privacy over the last 18 months. A buzzword, I think, everywhere. And we maybe hear stories all the time about how AI is now doing this, doing this, and what have you. So AI, which is going to be trustworthy, I mean, a company that does trustworthy AI, this will help kind of build confidence. This will help build confidence in their business that AI is only performing the tasks which you expect it to do.
And yeah, because it's so new, also people are very afraid of what this could mean for their privacy and their personal lives, and also because a little because they don't know what is happening under the hook, like Dan was saying. So I think yeah, transparency is a big principle that you have to follow here, because consumer needs to know what the AI technology is going to do, and they need to trust that the decisions that affect them are fair and are unbiased. They need to know that their outcome is fair, that the systems take their privacy seriously, that privacy by design was taken into consideration, and that privacy was considered every step of the way while building, deploying, and using this kind of AI systems. And finally, that the system is accountable for any unwanted consequences, and that they can trust that they could do something if the system doesn't behave as expected. How do you, with all the new legislation and all the legislation that is in the process of become law, how do AI systems ensure they are trustworthy and that they don't infringe on privacy?
Am I allowed to plug TrustArc again here?
You're allowed.
Go on. Yeah, so again, so for those that weren't aware on this webinar, TrustArc have recently launched a responsible AI certification program, and this incorporates principles of various leading industry AI standards, as well as regulations such as the EU AI Act. And the benefit to organizations that sign up for this. They're showing customers and partners really that they've implemented AI with their AI program with data and with privacy protection in mind.
Yeah, so in full disclosure, we use TrustArc to help us with our data protection framework. So having something like like this in place for AI practices as well, I think is crucial. I think this is just the beginning, and you're going to see more of this coming out. We've got the EU AI Act. We've got U.S. Congress is looking into this. Having some kind of framework, like you mentioned with the privacy program earlier, having some kind of framework to lay this up against and to lay your practices up against and say, what are we doing? How are we using it? Are we following our own values? And what are we communicating to the consumer? I think are all crucial. And having some kind of certification in place can demonstrate that right at the beginning.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, like going back to how like using framework is beneficial to like a streamlined compliance, and with the Trustworthy AI certification, you ensure that you're like complying and like with different frameworks like the OECD, like the EU AI Act, and that you're going to like be in a good place when like upcoming regulations start to show up. So I want to like summarize briefly what we've discussed so far. It's important to recognize that trust is not only a byproduct of good business practices, but is a valuable asset in itself. As we've discussed today, one of the most effective ways to cultivate and maintain this trust is by prioritizing data privacy, not only complying with laws and regulations, but like using it as a core value of your organization. But also like complying with privacy laws and regulations. You also mitigate risk of costly fines and legal consequences. But as we've been saying, like it demonstrates to consumers that you respect their privacy rights. And that includes providing clear information about how their data is collected, used, shared, and obtained, explicit consent for these purposes, and also like complying with these principles like privacy by design. You ensure customers that their privacy comes first, and that is going to be maintained throughout the life cycle of their data. We discuss also consumer trust. Empowering consumers to control their own data is key to building trust, giving them the tools and options to consent and manage their data. It shows that you value their autonomy and that you're committed to ethical data practices. And transparency is one of the most important like principles that you need to follow in order to obtain consumer trust. Being open and honest about your data handling privacy, including potential risk, your limitations, that fosters trust and helps consumer to make informed decisions about their interactions with your organization. And something that is very important is that communicating transparently with your consumer also means that you make it easy for the consumer to understand what you're saying. So providing user-friendly means for consumer to exercise their rights is, well, this is not only a legal obligation, but is a fundamental aspect of building trust, whether it's through user-friendly privacy settings, easy to understand privacy policies, or dedicated support channels enabling consumers to assert their rights, ensure that their data is handled legally and lawfully. And lastly, but not least, accountability. That is paramount. By taking responsibility for the outcomes of your data practices and being proactive in addressing the concerns about breaches, you show consumers that you're committed to upholding their trust and protecting their privacy. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you both for your being here. You've been wonderful speakers.